The blink. The night air over the Atacama Desert was so thin and still that even the faintest whisper of wind carried for miles. The Cerro Las Campanas Observatory stood in silence, a fortress of glass and steel against the endless black sea of the cosmos. Inside, under dim amber light, Dr. Elias Navarro adjusted the calibration on the main telescope array for what should have been a routine survey of 3I divided by Atlas, the second known interstellar object to pass through the solar system after Oumuamua. For months, astronomers had tracked its trajectory, a faint ember cutting through the cold fabric of space, its motion graceful, predictable, ordinary. But that night, ordinary would vanish. At 2 hours 17 minutes and 49 seconds UTC, the sky blinked. It wasn't the flare of a satellite or the stutter of a cosmic ray hitting the sensors. It was something else, too instantaneous to be natural, too localized to be random. The blink came from the exact coordinates of 3I divided by Atlas, but the comet itself remained undisturbed. On the observatory's live feed, the stars surrounding it flickered, as if a curtain of invisible force had rippled through the vacuum. Navarro froze. For a fraction of a second, the light from 3I divided by Atlas had sharpened into a pulse, clean, geometric, a perfect square of radiance that expanded and collapsed before anyone could even react. The system's alarm chimed a soft, almost apologetic tone, signaling an anomaly in spectral flux. Navarro's fingers hovered over the console, eyes scanning the logs. Every sensor read normal. The telescope's power levels hadn't spiked. No cosmic interference had been recorded. Yet the visual data displayed a pattern, a sharp peak in luminosity across multiple spectrums, all aligning at the same nanosecond. It was as though the comet had emitted a message in light, and the observatory just happened to be watching when it happened. He called for Ana Ruiz, the night technician, who had been cataloguing starfield readings in the adjacent dome. She hurried in, her boots echoing on the metal floor. The moment she saw the playback, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "That's impossible," she whispered, leaning closer to the monitor. The frame-by-frame replay showed the blink more clearly now, a brief flare structured like an optical code, its symmetry unnerving. It wasn't noise, it wasn't chance, it was deliberate. For the next hour, the two replayed the footage over and over, isolating each wavelength band. Every analysis yielded the same result. The light spike was mathematically precise. Its rise and fall times followed a logarithmic curve, almost like the pulse of a heartbeat, but faster, sharper, controlled. Ruiz cross-checked the timing with other observatories through the network, but no one else had reported anything similar. Only Cerro Las Campanas had caught it, and even then, only one telescope in the array had logged the anomaly. Navarro sat back, staring at the glowing data streams. "It's not a reflection," he murmured. "It's not a glitch." The words hung heavy in the room. Ruiz, pale under the soft monitor light, nodded silently. "Then what is it?" Outside, the desert lay in absolute stillness, an ocean of dust beneath a tapestry of stars. The silence pressed against the dome walls, almost listening. The longer they watched the playback, the more uneasy they became. The blink seemed to mock them, an intentional flicker in the void, as if something vast and intelligent had noticed their gaze and had, for just a moment, blinked back. By dawn, the observatory's control room was filled with whispers and fatigue. Navarro had sent encrypted copies of the data to the National Astrophysical Data Center, labeling the incident as transient optical irregularity. But the label felt hollow. Nothing in the equations explained the precision of that light. As the sun crept over the horizon, flooding the desert in gold, Navarro stepped outside and squinted at the fading stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of their instruments, 3I divided by Atlas continued its silent journey. He couldn't shake the feeling that it had noticed them first. That morning, the observatory's logs were sealed for review, and the footage archived under restricted access. Yet in the days that followed, every member of the night shift admitted the same thing in private. When the sky blinked, it felt as if the universe itself had turned to look at them. And in that gaze, brief as it was, something ancient and unknown had stared back. Unrepeatable light. When the team reconvened the next evening, the air in the observatory felt heavier, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the tension of the night before. Elias Navarro hadn't slept. He had spent the entire day reviewing logs, running calibration checks, and cross-referencing the system diagnostics. Every test returned clean results. No fluctuations in temperature, no magnetic interference, no electrical surges. The telescope had performed flawlessly, and yet the blink remained an indelible mark burned into the night's memory, existing outside the boundaries of known physics. Ruiz entered with 2 mugs of coffee and dropped into the chair beside him. "I've gone through every timestamp," she said quietly. "The system didn't miss a beat. No skipped frames, no anomalies before or after the pulse. It's like it never happened, except that it did." She gestured to the looping video on the main screen, where the ghostly flare repeated in eternal silence. Each time it flashed, it sent a chill down her spine. Navarro leaned forward, his face lit by the flickering light. "I checked the European Southern Observatory's log. Nothing. Keck reported no flux changes either. It's as if we were the only ones watching at that exact fraction of a second." "Which doesn't make sense," Ruiz replied. "If it was a reflection, at least one of the other observatories would have picked it up." They sat in silence for a moment, the faint hum of cooling fans filling the space. The anomaly had transformed from a scientific curiosity into an obsession. The other technicians, once eager to catch a glimpse of 3I divided by Atlas, now avoided the terminal where the footage played. One had even claimed to hear a high-pitched tone during the blink's replay, a sound the recording shouldn't have contained. Ruiz rubbed her temples. "We've got 1 second of data that doesn't fit any astrophysical model. It's too sharp, too consistent. Natural sources, novae, quasars, cosmic rays, they don't behave like this. It's structured." Navarro exhaled slowly. "Structured like what?" "Like it was designed." That word "designed" hung between them like static. Designed by what, though? The idea felt absurd, yet every dataset seemed to whisper the same conclusion. The intensity curve of the blink followed a pattern that mirrored the Fibonacci sequence in microsecond increments. Light shouldn't know mathematics, yet this one did. Over the following days, the observatory tried to replicate the event. They ran automated sweeps over 3I divided by Atlas's coordinates, expanding the observation radius, shifting filters from visible light to infrared, then to radio. Every night, the result was the same. Nothing. The comet drifted on, indifferent, silent. No more flashes, no anomalies, just a pale streak against the dark. By the 4th night, fatigue had settled over the team like a fog. Conversations grew sparse, laughter disappeared, and even the desert's eternal calm began to feel oppressive. The local technicians whispered of bad omens. Superstition seeped through the cracks of scientific rationality. At 3:02 that morning, Navarro stared once again at the empty expanse of data scrolling across his monitor. Each column, each line of code, was an ocean of numbers describing silence. He couldn't explain why he still expected the blink to return. It was irrational, but some instinct told him it had not been a one-time event, it had been a test. When Ruiz rejoined him, she carried a new report, a statistical analysis comparing the blink's photometric distribution to known artificial light sources. "Look at this," she said, placing the tablet beside him. "The energy pattern matches the signature of an optical transmission pulse used in deep space communications, but the power output—" She trailed off, eyes wide. "It's too high for anything we've built. If this was a transmission, it didn't come from Earth." Navarro's mouth went dry. "You're saying someone or something sent that pulse deliberately?" I'm saying the data fits the profile." She glanced toward the window, where the desert stretched endlessly into the horizon. "But there's more. When we reprocessed the waveform, there was residual interference in the surrounding pixel field, a faint echo that shouldn't exist." "An echo?" Ruiz nodded. "Like a reflection, from something between us and the comet." That realization struck harder than the initial blink. If there was an echo, it meant an object had been there, something large enough to distort the signal, but invisible to the telescope's optics. Navarro felt a coldness settle in his chest. He began recalculating the distance markers, trying to estimate the position of the anomaly. It wasn't far. Maybe within the orbit of Jupiter. He saved the data under a temporary folder, encrypting it before uploading it to the secure server. For now, it was only between him and Ruiz. The others didn't need to know, not until they understood what they were looking at. The last thing they needed was panic or a media leak. That night, as the observatory rotated to track the shifting stars, Navarro found himself stepping outside again. The desert air bit at his skin, sharp and dry. Above him, the Milky Way stretched like a luminous scar, beautiful and unknowable. Somewhere in that tapestry, 3I divided by Atlas continued its path through the solar system, carrying with it a mystery that refused to fade. He thought about the pulse, how deliberate it felt, how human it seemed in its precision. He thought about the echo, the hidden object that might have mirrored it. A question gnawed at the edges of his mind. What if the blink hadn't been a mistake? What if it had been acknowledgement? When he closed his eyes, he could still see the light, brief, perfect, and impossibly alive. And as he listened to the hum of the observatory behind him, Navarro realized that the unrepeatable light wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was an invitation, one he couldn't yet read, but one that had already changed everything. The observatory lockdown. By the time the third week passed, the atmosphere at Cerro Las Campanas Observatory had shifted from unease to quiet paranoia. What had begun as a scientific anomaly was now a whispered secret, guarded behind locked doors and encrypted drives. Navarro could feel it, the weight of too many questions pressing down on too few answers. The blink had not repeated, but its ghost haunted every instrument, every analysis, every mind that had seen it. It was no longer just data, it had become a wound. On the morning of March 11th, an unmarked vehicle arrived at the base of the observatory. 2 men and 1 woman stepped out, wearing plain clothes and the kind of calm that screamed authority. They introduced themselves as representatives from the International Astronomical Coordination Office, an entity Navarro had only heard of in passing, buried deep within bureaucratic chains that rarely touched field observatories. They asked to see the director. By noon, the observatory's main data servers were placed in restricted access mode. All outgoing transmissions were halted for security verification. The external network, links to the global observatory network, were severed. For the first time in years, Cerro Las Campanas was completely cut off from the outside world. Ruiz confronted Navarro in the break room, her tone sharp with disbelief. "This isn't protocol. We've reported anomalies before gamma bursts, irregular transits, but we've never been ordered into lockdown. This is something else." Navarro, exhausted from endless meetings, could only nod. "They want to verify the source data. They said it's standard after an instrumentation event." She scoffed. "Instrumentation event? That's their phrase for a malfunction. Are they seriously pretending this was a glitch?" The truth was that Navarro didn't know. The representatives, he refused to call them inspectors, had confiscated all physical drives containing the raw optical recordings. They left behind a clean system image, free of the blink data. The only surviving copy of the original file was Navarro's private encrypted backup, hidden under an innocuous file name deep within a personal folder. Late that night, the team gathered in the control room, their voices hushed. They had been told not to discuss the event outside of official briefings. The monitors were dark, their feeds rerouted through the central control system managed by the visitors. Ruiz paced restlessly near the console. "They're not scientists," she muttered. "They haven't asked a single technical question. They're just watching." Navarro didn't answer. He was staring at the log from the night of the blink, the one he had printed before the lockdown. Each line of data felt sacred now, an artifact of something vast. He could still see the pulse frequency, its mathematical rhythm, the elegance of its symmetry. He knew, deep down, that this wasn't just a cosmic coincidence. Someone, somewhere, had wanted to be seen. The following morning, the observatory director, Dr. Helena Orsini, called a staff meeting. Her voice trembled despite her practiced calm. "Effective immediately. All personnel are restricted from discussing the 3I divided by Atlas anomaly publicly or privately. The data remains classified under international review. Anyone found leaking information will face disciplinary and legal consequences." A murmur rippled through the room. Someone asked, "Legal consequences? For what?" Looking at the stars, Orsini's expression darkened. "For mishandling potentially sensitive material." Ruiz turned toward Navarro, whispering, "Sensitive to whom?" That night, when the facility lights dimmed and the observatory domes closed, Navarro stayed behind in the control room. The screens reflected the faint glow of his tired face. He connected an external drive and retrieved his hidden backup. His pulse quickened as the data loaded, the blink, preserved exactly as he remembered it. He replayed it slowly, frame by frame. There it was again, that impossible square of light, that fleeting instant of precision that no telescope should ever capture by accident. He ran a new analysis, comparing the blink's pixel matrix against known patterns of cosmic interference. But something new emerged. In the digital noise surrounding the pulse, faint distortions appeared, microscopic deviations that didn't belong to any known natural process. When he magnified them, a pattern began to form. Coordinates. His heart pounded. The coordinates pointed to a position near the southern magnetic pole, not in the sky, but on Earth. He sat frozen, staring at the data. The blink hadn't just come from space, it had reflected or echoed back toward Earth. And now, hidden in the interference, was a reference point. A message, perhaps, pointing to where something had touched the planet's field. Before he could process it further, the door behind him opened. One of the visiting inspectors stood in the doorway. "Dr. Navarro," the man said softly, "you're not authorized to access those files." Navarro's mouth went dry. "I'm just verifying calibration data." The man's eyes didn't blink. "Then verify it in the morning. The system logs your actions. Don't make this difficult." When the man left, Navarro shut down the console, deleting his access history but keeping the encrypted coordinates on a separate hidden drive. He stared out the window at the desert beyond, where the silence stretched eternal. Somewhere beneath that sky, something had blinked a signal no one wanted to acknowledge, a truth being buried under bureaucracy. He whispered into the stillness, "Why hide this?" But the stars, indifferent as always, offered no reply. And yet, as he turned back to his console, he noticed something chilling. The system's internal clock had jumped ahead by 4 seconds. It wasn't a glitch. It was synchronized to the timestamp of the blink. Something or someone had just accessed the observatory's network from outside. In that moment, Navarro understood. The lockdown wasn't about protecting them from the truth. It was about keeping the truth from getting out. Encrypted coordinates. The morning after the confrontation, the observatory was eerily quiet. A fine layer of desert dust had crept in through the ventilation shafts, coating the control panels in a thin grey film. Navarro sat alone in his office, staring at the small flash drive in his palm. It was no larger than his thumb, but he knew the data it held could ignite a storm across the scientific community if it ever saw daylight. The coordinates hidden within the blink's residual noise weren't random. They formed a pattern, too deliberate, too precise to dismiss as a processing artifact. He connected the drive to his offline terminal, a system with no network access, no surveillance logs. The encrypted files appeared instantly, their labels disguised under meaningless file names: thermal, backup, 4, instrument, ref, doc, test, noise, pattern. His heart raced as he opened the first. Lines of data streamed across the screen, incomprehensible at first, until he overlaid them on a magnetic map of Earth. The pattern aligned perfectly with the planet's southern magnetic pole, where geomagnetic flux lines converged into a narrow, turbulent corridor. Ruiz entered without knocking, her expression drawn. "They're leaving," she said. "The inspectors packed up everything this morning. They took the server backups, even the raw calibration logs. Orsini says we're integrated into the global network by next week." Navarro turned to face her, his eyes dark with exhaustion. "Did they say anything about what they found?" "Nothing. Just that we should consider the case closed." "Is light noom perpected?" He hesitated, then gestured for her to come closer. "Look at this." She leaned over his shoulder as he pulled up the magnetic overlay. The numbers lit up against the deep blue map, a trail of coordinates forming a spiral near the pole. Ruiz frowned. "That's not random." "No. I think the blink encoded this. When I filtered the residual static, it formed a repeating modulation that maps directly to Earth's magnetic geometry. I ran it through a fractal analysis. The spacing between the coordinate points follows a harmonic ratio." Ruiz's brow furrowed. "A ratio of what?" He looked up at her, his voice low. "Of human brainwave frequencies." The silence that followed was suffocating. The implication was absurd, yet undeniable. The pulse from 3I divided by Atlas, an interstellar object millions of kilometers away, had somehow embedded a reference to biological resonance frequencies on Earth. It wasn't communication in the traditional sense. It was recognition. Ruiz stepped back, her breathing shallow. "You think it knows we're here? I think it knows what we are." They stared at the glowing spiral, the cold data now pulsing with a strange, almost sentient rhythm. Navarro opened another layer of the file, a secondary dataset hidden within the coordinate encoding. At first it appeared as random noise, But when he applied a simple binary translation, text began to form. It wasn't any language he recognized, but the structure, syntax, repetition, punctuation suggested linguistic intent. He copied the sequence into a decryption model used for analyzing pulsar communication patterns. After several failed attempts, the program froze, then rendered a line of symbols that looked eerily geometric, almost architectural, interlocking circles and angled crosses. Ruiz whispered, "That looks like a map." "A map to what?" Navarro asked, but he already knew. The design mirrored the alignment of geomagnetic anomalies scattered across the southern hemisphere, points where Earth's magnetic field fluctuated abnormally, places often associated with atmospheric interference and strange satellite readings. He pulled up the International Magnetometer database and layered the coordinates over it. The symbols lined up perfectly with one specific location, a desolate patch of ice in Antarctica, roughly 600 kilometers from the South Pole. The system tagged it with an old code, Station 4A, a decommissioned research base abandoned after a mysterious equipment failure 2 decades ago. Ruiz frowned. "I've heard of that site. They shut it down after a geomagnetic collapse, something about the instruments going haywire. Nobody's been there since." Navarro felt his pulse quicken. Maybe that's where it touched. It was not to make. She gave him a sharp look. "Touched? You think whatever caused the blink actually what landed there?" "I don't know. But the coordinates, the frequency encoding, the harmonic structure, it's like it's pointing us there, or warning us." He saved the decrypted map to a secure partition, encrypting it under a new cipher key. He couldn't trust the observatory's systems anymore. Even after the inspector's departure, the network logs showed remote access attempts from unidentified IP ranges. Someone or something was still watching. That night, Navarro and Ruiz met in the observation dome, the sky clear and mercilessly beautiful. They watched 3I divided by Atlas through the main telescope, its faint glimmer unchanged, drifting silently through the black. Ruiz broke the silence. "If this really is some kind of message, why us? Why now?" Navarro didn't answer immediately. "Maybe it didn't choose us. Maybe we just happened to look at the right time. Maybe that blink was a response to something we didn't even know we sent." She turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "And the coordinates?" He exhaled slowly. "Maybe they're an invitation." For a long while, neither spoke. The telescope hummed softly, tracking the cold arc of the comet across the void. Somewhere beneath the frozen wastes of Antarctica, an abandoned station sat silent beneath the auroras, its instruments long dead. Yet now, in the data's secret geometry, it pulsed again, alive, beckoning. When Navarro finally shut down the terminal, he slipped the flash drive into his pocket. He knew this was bigger than their observatory, bigger than any single discovery. Whatever had blinked out there in the darkness had left a trail on Earth, and he intended to follow it, no matter where it led. He glanced once more at the screen before turning away. The last frame of the blink still glowed faintly on the monitor, a perfect square of light, pulsing once every few seconds, as if waiting for someone to answer. The first leak. The leak began quietly, like a faint hiss of static before a storm. It was a Thursday night when Navarro first saw it buried deep in an obscure astrophysics forum, hosted on a forgotten corner of the web. The post was titled, 3I divided by Atlas Optical Echo, Undocumented Observation from Las Campanas. At first glance, it looked like another conspiracy thread, the kind where amateurs misinterpret cosmic data or splice random telescope images together for attention. But as Navarro read the contents, his stomach turned to ice. The post contained fragments of the exact light curve data he and Ruiz had collected, the same timestamp, the same energy spike, even the same harmonic ratio in the pulse duration. But what made his blood run cold was the author's message. The blink was a reply. "You just weren't listening." He stared at the screen, his mind racing. Only 2 people besides him had access to that data, Ruiz and the observatory's director, Dr. Orsini. The inspectors had confiscated the raw files, and all local backups had been wiped during the lockdown. Yet here it was, decrypted and public, posted by a user calling themselves Heliopause 9. Ruiz arrived at his office a few minutes later, breathless, her phone in hand. "You've seen it?" she asked. "Yes. They've already pulled it from the main forum," she said, showing him the blank page where the post had been deleted. "But copies are spreading. People are saving screenshots, re-uploading them on mirror sites. Whoever posted this knew what they were doing. Navarro rubbed his temples. It's too precise. The data's real, but how did they get it? She hesitated. Unless someone on the inside shared it. He shook his head. The files were encrypted under my personal key. Even if someone tried brute forcing it, it would take years. No, this was deliberate access, someone who knew exactly where to look. He scrolled back through the thread's archived copy, examining every line of the post. There was more hidden beneath the surface text embedded code in the formatting metadata. He ran a quick extraction and found an encoded string that resolved into a set of coordinates. Different from the Antarctic ones, but not unrelated. These pointed to a relay node in South Africa, part of an old satellite communication array used during the Cold War. Ruiz frowned. That site's been decommissioned for decades. Maybe not entirely. The implication hit them both simultaneously. If the signal from 3I divided by Atlas or whatever lay behind it had encoded coordinates leading to Antarctica, and now a leaked version of the same data pointed to another obsolete communications facility, it meant that someone or something was creating a trail. Breadcrumbs, Ruiz said softly. Navarro nodded. And someone wants us to follow them. By morning, the observatory's internal network was buzzing with rumors. The staff weren't supposed to know about the leak, but word had spread fast. Someone claimed the data had been sold to a private aerospace contractor. Another insisted it was part of a disinformation campaign to cover up a classified satellite failure. Navarro knew both explanations were wrong. The harmonic structures embedded in the blink couldn't have come from any known human transmission. They were too elegant, too alien in their mathematics. At noon, Dr. Orsini summoned Navarro and Ruiz to her office. Her face was drawn, her tone clipped. "You've seen the leak?" "Yes," Navarro said carefully. "Then you understand the gravity of the situation. The International Office has issued a containment directive. We're to deny all association with the event and refrain from discussing it further." Ruiz leaned forward. "But the data's real. If we don't clarify, it'll spiral out of control." Orsini's eyes hardened. "That's not our decision. This has moved beyond scientific inquiry. Do you understand?" The silence that followed was answer enough. When they left her office, Ruiz muttered under her breath, "They're burying it." Navarro didn't respond. He already knew that was true. But as he walked back to his lab, his thoughts kept circling back to the message in the leak, the one phrase that had lodged itself in his mind like a splinter. The blink was a reply. A reply to what? Humanity hadn't sent any targeted signal toward 3I divided by Atlas. Not officially. But as he dug through archived records of deep space transmissions, he found something strange. 2 months before the blink, a private research satellite operated by a communications startup had conducted an experimental data burst aimed at the general region of the comet's path. The project was called Echo Chain, designed to test interstellar signal propagation. The company had gone bankrupt shortly after. He tracked down their transmission logs. The signal frequency matched, almost perfectly, the harmonic baseline of the blink. Ruiz leaned over his shoulder. "Are you saying the blink was an answer to Echo Chain?" Navarro nodded slowly. "It's the only thing that fits. Something out there heard our transmission and sent something back." She swallowed hard. "Then that means it's listening." He met her gaze. "And now, apparently, so is someone else." That evening, a second post appeared on the same forum, this time shorter and more cryptic. It read, "If you're reading this, it's already too late. Watch the skies south of latitude -75. The pattern will repeat." Then, as before, it vanished, erased not by moderators, but by the server itself, leaving no trace in the logs. Navarro and Ruiz exchanged a glance. The coordinates matched the Antarctic site once more. Outside, the desert sky was dark and infinite. Somewhere above it, beyond the thin veil of atmosphere, 3I divided by Atlas continued its silent journey. But now it wasn't just scientists watching. Governments, private agencies, and nameless users hidden behind layers of encryption were all staring into the same abyss, waiting for the sky to blink again. Navarro knew it would. He could feel it in the numbers, in the rhythm of the data, like the beat of something vast and unseen, echoing across the stars. The unofficial task force. By the time the second week after the leak arrived, the world had begun to stir quietly, beneath the surface, in encrypted chat rooms, and behind unmarked research servers. What had begun as a single anonymous post on a forgotten forum was now rippling through the hidden corridors of the scientific underground. People Navarro had never heard of radio astronomers. Data encryption specialists, former defense contractors were suddenly reaching out through untraceable emails and private chat invitations. They called themselves the Task Force, though no one seemed to know who had formed it. Ruiz found the first message while combing through a secure astrophysics archive. The sender used an address formatted like a machine-generated tag, AX913, Continuum Gate. The subject line read, "We believe you. We have the same data." Inside, there was no text, only a link to a locked chat server and a single line of numbers, 0, 3, 17, 49, UTC, vertical bar, negative 75.4, 03, 2 degrees, south, 43.190, 7 degrees, west. The exact timestamp and coordinates of the blink. Navarro hesitated to open it, but curiosity won. The server was simple, no names, no avatars, only numerical identifiers. Yet, as the messages scrolled in, it became clear that these people weren't conspiracy theorists. They were professionals. One user uploaded raw spectral analyses from a private telescope array in New Zealand, showing faint electromagnetic irregularities consistent with the blink's harmonic frequency. Another, identifying only as Raven, posted a reconstructed waveform allegedly derived from satellite telemetry taken during the event. Ruiz read through it all with growing disbelief. These can't all be fabrications. Look, this one references proprietary instruments from the Norwegian Polar Institute. No civilian would have access to that data. Navarro nodded grimly. They've been monitoring too, maybe for years. As days passed, the chat grew into a kind of digital war room. Members compared notes, plotted trajectories, and cross-referenced each other's findings. A pattern began to emerge, a series of faint electromagnetic fluctuations recorded across multiple observatories on the night of the blink, all converging on the same harmonic resonance. It was as if something had reverberated through Earth's atmosphere, too subtle for normal sensors to detect, but captured in the noise if one knew where to look. They called it the echo pattern. Navarro and Ruiz contributed their own fragments. The coordinate map, the harmonic ratios, and the echo signature they'd isolated from the noise field. Within hours, someone under the handle Kestrel replied with a reconstructed image, an artistic interpretation perhaps, but eerily convincing. It depicted a web-like structure of energy waves, radiating outward from a single node near Antarctica. The caption read, "Something woke up." For a long time, no one spoke in the chat. Then, a new user joined, their ID tagged with an old military communication code, E54. They uploaded a single document, a redacted intelligence report from 1999, labeled Station 4A Incident Summary. Ruiz's eyes widened as she scrolled through it. The report described a magnetospheric collapse event that caused the sudden shutdown of all equipment at the Antarctic Research Station. Instruments had recorded a surge in local magnetic resonance, lasting 3.2 seconds, nearly identical in duration to the blink. The report ended with a chilling note. Residual electromagnetic anomaly remains active at subsurface depth, 1.7 kilometers. Unexplored. Containment recommended. Navarro felt his stomach twist. They knew. They've known for decades. He typed quickly into the chat. "Are you saying the 3I divided by Atlas event is connected to what happened at Station 4A? The reply came almost instantly. "Yes. The geometry matches. The source hasn't moved. The comet was never the origin. It was the mirror." Ruiz leaned back, pale. "The mirror?" Navarro's voice was barely a whisper. "The blink wasn't sent from 3I divided by Atlas. It was reflected by it." That realization shifted everything. The object, whatever it was behind 3I divided by Atlas, wasn't just an emitter. It was a relay, redirecting something that originated much closer to home, Earth. The task force erupted in speculation. One suggested the pulse was a feedback wave, a reflection of a signal humanity had unknowingly sent decades ago, perhaps during Cold War radar experiments or through deep space probes. Another posited something more unsettling, that the anomaly under the Antarctic ice wasn't just reflecting signals, but responding to them. Over the next week, Navarro and Ruiz worked tirelessly, cross-analyzing every piece of data. Sleep became an afterthought, their small office filled with screens displaying signal graphs, magnetic overlays, and decrypted waveform patterns. Outside, the Atacama sky remained brutally clear, mocking them with its endless silence. Then, one night, Ruiz called out from her terminal. "Elias, you need to see this." She had run a new frequency analysis on the blink's waveform, isolating its secondary harmonics. Within the noise, a faint modulation appeared, barely perceptible, but repeating at regular intervals. When translated through a simple binary mapping, it produced a string of alternating pulses that mirrored Morse code timing. Navarro stared, his mind reeling. "You're saying there's a message?" Ruiz nodded slowly. "Not words, just a pattern. But it's deliberate." They uploaded the sequence to the task force chat. Within minutes, user Raven decoded it further, translating the binary intervals into a visual format. What emerged was a simple geometric figure, two intersecting circles forming a lens shape. Below it, a single line of numbers, 01 divided by 05. The channel fell silent again. Then, E54 wrote, "That's not just a pattern, that's part of a sequence. There are 4 more." "Meaning what?" Ruiz typed. "Meaning the blink wasn't the end, it was the first in a series." Navarro leaned back, his chest tight. If what they were seeing was real, it meant the phenomenon wasn't random. It was structured, planned, perhaps even scheduled. And if 01 divided by 05 indicated a sequence, then 4 more events were yet to come. As dawn broke over the desert, Ruiz closed her laptop and looked out at the reddening horizon. "If this is right," she said quietly, "then the next blink isn't a question of if, it's when." Navarro nodded, his eyes fixed on the fading stars. "And the world won't be ready when it comes." That morning, he received an email from an untraceable address, containing only a single attachment, a short video clip from a satellite feed over the southern hemisphere. The footage showed the auroras above Antarctica, shimmering with unnatural intensity. Then, for a fraction of a second, the sky blinked again, disappearing observations. It began with missing pixels, tiny, imperceptible voids in data that should have been flawless. The first reports came from a small observatory in New Zealand, then another in Namibia, and finally, the European Space Agency's Deep Space Array in Spain. Each team reported the same phenomenon. Attempts to reobserve 3I divided by Atlas resulted in corrupted image files, fragmented telemetry, or complete system failures. The data wasn't simply unreadable, it was gone, erased as if it had never been recorded. Navarro received the first set of corrupted logs via the task force's encrypted server. The images looked like static at first white noise, scattered spectral bands, but when he analyzed them, he saw something far stranger. The missing data wasn't random. Each corrupted segment formed a repeating grid pattern, like the negative imprint of something obscuring the field of view. It wasn't interference, it was absence, shaped absence, as if an invisible object had blocked out sections of the sky. Ruiz sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "That's not a glitch," she said. "That's a mask." He nodded grimly. "A mask that moves." When they plotted the corrupted regions across multiple observatories, a trajectory emerged, an invisible path weaving between observation points, always just ahead of where 3I divided by Atlas should have been. Something was traveling with it, unseen. The task force chat erupted into a frenzy. Raven reported that 2 civilian telescopes had gone offline within minutes of attempting live observation. Their systems had rebooted automatically, their storage drives wiped. Another user, Spectre, claimed that certain government-linked space agencies were intercepting telescope data in real time, rerouting it through secure servers before researchers could access it. "Someone's cleaning the trail," Ruiz muttered. "Every time someone tries to look, the data gets erased." Navarro stared at the growing list of compromised observatories. No, not someone. Something. The more he thought about it, the clearer the pattern became. Each corrupted file carried a faint electromagnetic signature identical to the echo pattern they had traced weeks before, the same harmonic structure buried in the blink. It was as if the anomaly was defending itself, selectively wiping records of its presence. A self-erasing phenomenon. But why would a natural object behave that way? It was Ruiz who suggested the unthinkable. What if it's not just reflecting light? What if it's interacting with the instruments, directly rewriting what they see? Navarro felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine. That would explain the synchronization glitches, the lost frames, even the time displacement in their own logs. Whatever this was, it wasn't passive, it was aware. That night, as they monitored the feed from a private telescope in Chile, the live stream froze, mid-frame. Ruiz frowned. The systems hung again. Navarro leaned closer. The frame displayed a blurred field of stars, but in the center, right where 3I divided by Atlas should have been, was a faint distortion, a ripple in the digital fabric. He adjusted the filters, enhancing the contrast. The shape resolved, just for an instant, a perfect ring of darkness, symmetrical and sharp. Then the image collapsed, replaced by static. "The data's gone," Ruiz whispered. Navarro tried to recover it, but the entire drive had been wiped clean. Not corrupted, erased, overwritten with blank binary zeros. No trace of the observation remained. 2 days later, the task force's secure server suffered a breach. Every archived dataset, every waveform, every decoded coordinate deleted. The attackers left only one message, a short text file containing a single line, "Do not look again." The message appeared on multiple accounts simultaneously, including Navarro's offline terminal, something that shouldn't have been possible. When he disconnected his system from the network, the warning remained on his desktop, glowing in white text against a black screen. Ruiz's voice trembled as she spoke. "It knows we're trying to see it. We can tell Mingdane." Navarro forced himself to think logically. "No, that's impossible. It's data manipulation, someone spoofing our network." But even as he said it, he didn't believe his own words. That evening, they decided to run one final observation using the observatory's backup system, a decades-old optical array not connected to the main network. If there was interference, it would have to happen locally. Ruiz operated the tracking system manually, calibrating it toward the coordinates where the comet had last been observed. For hours, nothing appeared. The sky remained blank. Then, at exactly 2:14 UTC, the sensors flickered. The monitors filled with a burst of light, not a blink this time, but a wave, a soft expansion of brightness that pulsed across the frame. Ruiz gasped, "We've got something!" But before Navarro could save the data, the power surged. Every monitor went black, the lights flickered, and the observatory plunged into silence. The air smelled faintly of ozone. When the backup generator kicked in a few minutes later, the system rebooted. Every data file from the past 6 hours had been deleted, but one anomaly remained, a timestamp burned into the system log, impossible to remove. 2 hours, 14 minutes and 3 seconds UTC. Ruiz scrolled through the new calibration logs. There, hidden in the binary header, was a familiar harmonic sequence, the same Fibonacci-like pulse pattern from the first blink. But this one was longer, more complex. When she plotted it visually, it formed an expanding spiral. "It's growing," Navarro whispered. They uploaded the fragment to the task force channel. For nearly an hour, no one responded. Then, finally, Raven sent a single line. "We've lost 2 more observatories, both systems wiped." Another message followed from E54. "They're not being wiped, they're being rewritten. The pattern is embedding itself in the hardware." Navarro froze. "Embedding?" Ruiz looked at him, her face pale. "You mean it's learning from what we use to observe it?" He didn't reply. The thought was too vast to process. If the anomaly could interact with digital systems, altering their memory, then every observation, every attempt to document it, was feeding it more data. Outside, the desert was utterly still. The wind had died, and the stars shimmered faintly above. Navarro stepped out onto the observatory platform and looked toward the south, where 3I divided by Atlas drifted unseen beyond the horizon. For a brief moment, he thought he saw the sky flicker, not with light, but with absence, a subtle dimming that passed like a shadow over the stars. It was there, watching, erasing, preparing. And deep down, he knew that the more they tried to capture it, the less of the world's data would remain untouched, tracing the origin. In the days following the data erasures, Navarro and Ruiz found themselves living in a constant state of tension. Every keystroke felt like an act of defiance, every login a potential risk. The observatory was quieter now. Half the staff had been reassigned after the lockdown lifted, and the few who remained worked under strict instruction to limit unnecessary data retention. That phrase, unnecessary data retention, had become a mantra of silence, a bureaucratic shield against curiosity. But Navarro wasn't ready to stop looking. He couldn't. He had salvaged fragments of the erased files, bits of corrupted binary strings recovered from the observatory's residual cache memory. Each fragment contained remnants of the last observation before the blackout. At first, it seemed like nothing but noise, broken data, pixels scattered like cosmic dust, but as he reconstructed them one by one, a faint pattern began to take shape, a cluster of coordinates that did not correspond to the known path of 3I divided by Atlas. Ruiz stood over his shoulder, her expression taut. "That's not the comet's trajectory." "No," Navarro said. "It's something behind it." He adjusted the overlay on the celestial map, tracing the faint curvature of the coordinates. They led not along the comet's orbital path, but slightly offset, through an uncharted corridor of interstellar dust and debris, a space where no known body had been catalogued. Ruiz frowned. "That region's empty." "Not anymore." The next step was to verify it. They couldn't rely on traditional observatories anymore. Every attempt to record the anomaly resulted in data corruption. Instead, they turned to indirect methods: gravitational lensing analysis, radio signal backscatter, and deep spectrum noise modeling. If something large was moving behind 3I divided by Atlas, its gravitational field would leave subtle distortions in the background starlight. For 3 nights, they worked without rest, feeding astronomical archives into their model. And on the 4th night, as the desert wind howled outside the dome, the results appeared on screen, a faint but unmistakable distortion in the fabric of the data. Ruiz leaned closer. "It's not a natural object." Navarro nodded slowly. "The mass reading is inconsistent. It's not solid, it's oscillating. The anomaly wasn't behaving like a planet, asteroid, or comet. Its gravitational pull fluctuated rhythmically, as if it were generating or absorbing energy in pulses. When they mapped the oscillation frequency, it matched the blink's harmonic signature down to the 5th decimal point. "Whatever's behind 3I divided by Atlas," Ruiz whispered, "it's the source." Navarro felt the weight of that realization settle over him like a leaden fog. He stared at the shimmering distortion rendered on the screen, a ghostly outline, a shape defined not by light, but by its absence. It was vast, far larger than the comet itself, and yet almost perfectly concealed within its shadow. He cross-referenced the signal delay across multiple telescope logs. The pattern revealed a consistent rhythm, a repeating cycle every 28 hours. When translated into waveform analysis, the peaks formed a regular beat, eerily similar to a heartbeat. Ruiz broke the silence. "It's alive, isn't it? I feel so." Navarro hesitated. "I don't know if 'alive' is the right word, but it's not inert." That night, they shared their findings with the task force. Within hours, responses flooded in from around the world. Raven confirmed gravitational distortions consistent with their model from satellite archives in the Indian Ocean region. Spectre uploaded a snippet of radio interference detected on the same frequency. And then, E54 posted something that froze everyone in the chat: a classified transmission log from a retired defense satellite. The log showed that, exactly 48 hours after the blink, the satellite had received a narrowband signal from the same coordinates Navarro had identified. The signal wasn't a burst, it was a continuous transmission, lasting 17 seconds. The frequency encoded a structure of repeating numerical sequences, all prime numbers. Ruiz stared at the data in disbelief. "Prime numbers? That's not natural." Navarro nodded, his throat dry. "It's a language of logic, the simplest way to prove intelligence." The task force chat exploded in excitement. If the signal contained prime sequences, it meant communication deliberate, constructed, purposeful. But there was more. When they analyzed the transmission's waveform, they discovered faint modulations buried within the signal, oscillating at frequencies too low for typical detection. Those subharmonics corresponded exactly to the pattern embedded in the Antarctic coordinates. "Whatever this is," Raven typed, "it's talking to Earth." Navarro felt a chill run down his spine. The data wasn't random, and it wasn't isolated. The blink, the coordinates, the erased observations, they were all part of a single continuum, an ongoing exchange between something in deep space and something on or beneath the planet's surface. He typed into the chat, "If it's communicating, what's it saying?" No one replied for several minutes. Then E54 posted, "That's what we're afraid of. The Antarctic signal isn't responding, it's repeating, like an echo trying to synchronize." Ruiz frowned. You think it's trying to connect with whatever's behind 3I divided by Atlas? E-54's reply came almost instantly. No, it's already connected. The comet is just a mirror. The real transmission point is under the ice. The chat fell silent after that. No one wanted to say what they were all thinking, that Earth itself might be part of the network, an ancient receiver, reactivated by the blink. As dawn broke over the desert, Navarro and Ruiz sat in the dim light of the control room, surrounded by silent screens. The wind outside had died, leaving the world unnervingly still. Navarro finally spoke. If the source is behind the comet and the reflection is here, then maybe it's not trying to reach us at all. Ruiz looked at him, puzzled. What do you mean? He stared at the last image of the distortion, the flickering void behind 3I divided by Atlas. Maybe we're standing in the middle of a conversation that started long before we existed. She said nothing. In the distance, thunder rolled, a rare sound in the desert, deep and low, like the sky clearing its throat. And as Navarro watched the storm gather over the horizon, he couldn't help but think, maybe the universe wasn't silent after all. Maybe it had always been speaking. Humanity had just never learned how to listen. The signal inside the noise. For 3 nights, Navarro barely slept. He spent his waking hours surrounded by the faint hum of the observatory's backup servers, the glow of monitors reflecting off his tired eyes. The deeper he dug into the signal, the less it resembled anything he had ever studied. It wasn't a transmission in the conventional sense, it was something woven into the background itself, like a second voice layered beneath the static hum of the universe. It was Ruiz who noticed the pattern first. She had been isolating the low-frequency subharmonics in the radio archive, her headphones pressed tight as if listening to a whisper in a crowded room. "Elias," she said, pulling off the headset. "Listen to this." He leaned close. From the speakers came a low, rhythmic pulse, barely audible, like the sound of distant machinery underwater. It wasn't random. The intervals between pulses were exact, repeating in increments of 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Prime numbers. Navarro frowned. "It's deliberate." Ruiz nodded. "I checked across multiple recordings. The pattern repeats in every signal associated with the 3I divided by Atlas trajectory, no matter the instrument or wavelength. It's like it's hiding inside the background radiation." He felt a chill as he realized the implications. The pattern wasn't just present in telescope data, it was everywhere, woven into the very noise that all radio telescopes record but filter out as irrelevant. For decades, humanity had been discarding this whisper, dismissing it as cosmic static. Now, for the first time, someone was listening closely enough to hear the message inside. They ran the pulse data through a Fourier transform to visualize its structure. The graph that appeared was beautiful and terrifying, a perfect lattice of harmonic frequencies intersecting in recursive patterns. Not just mathematical order, but design. "It's like a signature," Ruiz whispered. "A fingerprint in the static. Idea. Ten his proference in Fingsale." Navarro stared at the lattice, a growing dread stirring in his chest. Or a language. He exported the harmonic pattern into a 3D mapping algorithm. The result was astonishing. The waveforms aligned into a 3-dimensional grid, a lattice that appeared to represent spatial coordinates. Each harmonic node corresponded to a physical point in space. The map didn't just define a location, it outlined a network. Ruiz leaned closer, her voice trembling. "Those nodes, they're not random. They match known positions of interstellar dust regions and minor gravitational anomalies. It's mapping the voids between stars, the empty spaces," Navarro said. "Places where there's nothing visible. That's where the signal lives." They sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the map. It looked alive, shimmering with mathematical precision, as though something vast and unseen were breathing within the fabric of space itself. When they fed the waveform through a temporal filter, another layer emerged, a slow modulation, occurring once every 28 hours. The same periodicity as the gravitational fluctuation they detected behind 3I divided by Atlas. Ruiz's eyes widened. "It's the same source." "Then this isn't just a reflection," Navarro murmured. "It's a broadcast." He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "If it's broadcasting a structured signal on a universal frequency, then it's not meant for us. It's meant for anyone who can hear it." "But it's synchronized with the echo beneath the Antarctic ice," Ruiz said. "It's like it's calling home." They uploaded the data to the task force for verification. Within hours, replies began flooding in. Raven confirmed that the same harmonic structure was present in decades-old radio archives, recordings made long before 3I divided by Atlas entered the solar system. The signal had been there all along, undetected, buried inside the noise. E54 sent a chilling message. You're not detecting the signal, you're detecting interference. It's everywhere because it's been here since before we built instruments to hear it. Navarro stared at that line, feeling his stomach twist. He's saying it's always been part of the universe, Ruiz whispered, or part of us. They examined the waveform again, zooming into the smallest fluctuations. Within the noise, they found micro-variations that resembled neural oscillations, brainwave patterns, the same frequency range as human alpha and theta rhythms. The realization was unbearable. The signal wasn't just cosmic, it was biological. Ruiz's voice trembled. Elias, what if it's using us to listen to itself? He turned to her slowly, his voice hollow. Then that means it's not just communicating through light or radiation, it's communicating through consciousness. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind outside had picked up, howling against the dome. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed. Navarro could feel the weight of something immense pressing against the edges of perception, as if the act of discovering the signal had drawn its attention. When he returned to his terminal, a new message was waiting in the task force channel. It was from an unknown user, no ID, no timestamp, just 3 words. You are heard. He stared at the words for a long time. Then, without meaning to, he whispered into the still air. Who's listening? He denied. The room was silent, save for the hum of electronics. Then, faintly, through the static of the open radio receiver, a single pulse echoed low, deliberate, identical to the pattern they'd just analyzed. Ruiz looked at him, wide-eyed. That came through live. Navarro swallowed hard. It's responding. They sat frozen, watching the spectrum analyzer display the pulse. It repeated twice more, then stopped. For a moment, everything returned to silence. And then, at the very edge of audibility, a series of higher frequencies emerged, sharp, staccato bursts that didn't match any known modulation. Ruiz leaned closer to the monitor, whispering, "It's trying to say something." He was a superly seek out. Navarro began recording, his hands trembling. He had no idea what the message meant, only that it felt impossibly old, impossibly vast, as though the stars themselves had chosen to speak through their machines. When the signal finally ceased, the last recorded frequency resolved into a simple binary pattern. He translated it automatically and froze. It read, 03 divided by 05, prepare. The room felt colder suddenly. Ruiz looked at him, pale as ash. The sequence, she whispered. It's counting down. He nodded slowly. The first blink was 1, the next one's coming. Outside, the desert stretched beneath a sky heavy with stars, each one burning with quiet indifference. Yet somewhere among them, something vast and unseen had spoken, and for the first time in human history, Earth had answered. The interview that never aired. By the time the third signal fragment appeared, word of the strange astronomical event had leaked beyond the task force's encrypted circles. Not to the mainstream scientific community, not yet, but to the shadows of it. A journalist named Marina Kellen from the European Science Network had caught wind of the incident through an anonymous source, claiming to have obtained unreleased optical data from Las Campanas Observatory. She was known for chasing suppressed research stories, the kind that brushed too close to classified projects for comfort. When she contacted Navarro, he almost didn't respond. But the tone of her message wasn't sensationalist. It was clinical, precise, and unsettlingly familiar. Dr. Navarro, I believe you've observed something unusual in connection with 3I divided by Atlas. I have reason to believe multiple governments are aware of this event and are coordinating to obscure its details. I'd like to speak with you off record. Ruiz warned him not to. You know what happens to people who talk about this. Orsini's already on edge. They'll shut you down. The sea freight. I don't plan to tell her everything, Navarro said, but someone needs to know. He agreed to a recorded interview under the pretense of discussing his research on photometric anomalies. Marina flew to Chile under the radar, carrying a small satellite uplink camera and a suitcase full of encrypted drives. She arrived at the observatory on a Friday evening just before sunset, her face half hidden under a scarf. When she shook Navarro's hand, Her grip was cold, but her eyes burned with the kind of curiosity only truth could ignite. They sat in the observatory's control dome as night fell, the air filled with the quiet hum of machinery. The telescope rotated slowly above them, tracking the indifferent stars. Marina set up her camera, its small green light blinking steadily. "Let's start simple," she said. "You were the first to record the optical event near 3I divided by Atlas. Can you describe what you saw?" Navarro hesitated, his eyes on the telescope feed. It was a pulse brief, deliberate. It didn't match any known natural phenomenon. The light was structured, mathematically precise. "We thought it was an error at first." "And it wasn't?" "No." Marina leaned forward. "Then what was it?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We believe it was a signal, not from the comet itself, but from something behind it. The light wasn't emitted, it was reflected, redirected. It wasn't random." Marina's expression didn't change. "So you're saying this was an intentional event, that something or someone communicated using optical wavelengths?" Navarro nodded slowly. "That's what the data suggests." "Do you know where the signal originated?" He hesitated again. "We've traced its reflection to an object in deep space, but its true origin appears to be terrestrial, or at least connected to Earth's magnetic field. There's something under the ice in Antarctica. The coordinates encoded in the blink lead there." For the first time, Marina's composure faltered. "Under the ice?" "Yes. A station that's been closed for over 20 years. We believe it's transmitting or echoing the same signal pattern." The camera's light blinked steadily as he spoke. Outside, wind howled against the dome, moaning like some distant creature. Marina sat back. "This isn't the first time governments have hidden cosmic data, but you're describing an ongoing transmission. Why hide it?" Navarro exhaled. "Because it's not just data. It's changing things, erasing observations, altering equipment. The more we try to record it, the more it rewrites what we see. It's almost as if the act of observing feeds it." She frowned. "Feeds it how?" He hesitated. "Like it's learning." They fell silent. The only sound was the steady mechanical rotation of the telescope. Finally, Marina broke the silence. "You realize if I air this, it'll be pulled within hours, maybe minutes." "I know." He leaned closer. "But you'll have evidence. The world deserves to see what's happening." She nodded, her expression softening. "Then we'll make sure it does." The interview lasted nearly an hour. Navarro spoke carefully but honestly, omitting the names of the task force and certain classified details. He gave her enough to construct a story that could reach the public without collapsing under disbelief. When it was over, she smiled faintly. "You've just changed everything," she said. But the broadcast never aired. The next morning, as Marina prepared to upload the footage to her network's secure server, her satellite uplink malfunctioned. The entire file, nearly 20 gigabytes of encrypted video, vanished mid-transfer. Her equipment registered a system anomaly. Transmission interrupted. External override. Within an hour, her credentials were revoked. The European Science Network's official statement the following day announced her temporary suspension for unauthorized content creation. Navarro received a single text message from her that night. They wiped everything. Someone else was already in the system. Then she disappeared. Her social media accounts deleted, her contact numbers disconnected, her apartment in Paris emptied within 48 hours. When Navarro told Ruiz, she went pale. She was silenced. He nodded grimly. "Someone doesn't want this story told." Later that night, as he sat alone in the observatory's control room, he noticed something strange. The internal network log showed an access request at 3:17 UTC from an untraceable IP address. The file retrieved was labeled Session MK10. It was the file name Marina had used for the interview recording. But what chilled him wasn't that someone had accessed it. It was that the request came from within the observatory using his credentials. He turned to the telescope feed instinctively. Outside, the stars shimmered in their eternal stillness. But for a fraction of a second, one point of light blinked twice, then once, then twice again. "Binary. A pattern," Navarro whispered into the empty room. "What are you trying to say?" No answer came. Only the faint hum of the machines, the sound of a world that had begun to feel less like science and more like surveillance. The next morning, he checked the observatory's storage logs again. The file, Session MK10, was gone overwritten by a system process that didn't exist. But in its place, buried deep in a hidden directory, he found a single line of code embedded in the system metadata, 04 divided by 05. We are near. Ruiz read it over his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. The fourth sequence. Navarro nodded slowly. And that means the next blink will be the last, she finished. Outside, the sky was clear, painfully blue. Somewhere, far above that fragile canopy, the unseen thing that had once blinked near 3i divided by Atlas was preparing to speak again, and this time, the world would hear it. The hidden footage, the days after Marina's disappearance, were a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. Navarro no longer trusted the observatory's systems or the silence between them. Every click of a keyboard, every low hum of the servers felt like an intrusion. The facility had become a mausoleum for secrets, and every monitor glowed like a watchful eye. Ruiz stopped sleeping entirely, surviving on bitter coffee and instinct. The air inside the dome felt charged, as if the building itself was listening. It was Ruiz who first found the footage. It arrived unannounced, hidden in a compressed archive, sent through the task force's encrypted relay. No sender ID, no traceable path, just a file named Locus 4. Navarro hesitated to open it. It could be a trap, he warned. Ruiz shook her head. Or it's the only proof left. The archive unfolded into a single video file, grainy and distorted. At first, all they could see was blackness, then the faint green haze of night vision imagery flickering to life. The footage appeared to have been filmed from a handheld camera somewhere in the Chilean desert, close enough, Navarro realized, to their own observatory. A voice whispered in Spanish, muffled by wind, confirming visual lock. 3, maybe 4 objects, altitude unknown. The camera tilted upward. Against the star-filled sky, faint points of light hovered motionless, arranged in a perfect geometric formation. For a few seconds, the camera shook as the operator adjusted focus. The lights resolved into luminous discs, each pulsing in rhythm. Navarro leaned closer, heart pounding. "It's the same pattern," he whispered. Ruiz nodded. The blink sequence. The objects began to move, synchronizing into a spiral before flattening into a horizontal line. Then, suddenly, they blinked once in unison. The screen filled with static, the image breaking apart. When the footage returned, the sky was empty. Only the wind remained. Navarro froze the frame, rewinding the few seconds before the interference. He enhanced the brightness and slowed the playback speed. Between the frames of static, something appeared barely visible but undeniable. A shadow. Not of a solid object, but of space itself folding, like a ripple in the air. The distortion was identical to the gravitational anomaly they had mapped behind 3i divided by Atlas. It wasn't just reflecting in space anymore, it was here, Ruiz whispered. It followed the sequence. They sent the footage to the task force. Hours later, the chat exploded with speculation. Raven confirmed that the blinking pattern matched the one seen in both the Antarctic transmissions and the 3i divided by Atlas light curve. Spectre claimed he recognized the terrain in the video, the Atacama Flats, roughly 60 kilometers north of their observatory. Then E54 posted a message that made Ruiz's hands tremble. "We've received similar footage, multiple sources, objects observed in South Africa, Western Australia, and southern Chile, all within the same 24-hour window." Navarro read it twice before responding. The formation is global. The implications were staggering. The sequence wasn't isolated to deep space anymore. It was manifesting around the planet, the same pattern repeating across hemispheres, as if the phenomenon had expanded its reach or its attention. Ruiz began to notice strange things happening in the observatory's periphery. Equipment flickered without warning. The radio receivers emitted faint tones when no signal was present. Once, while reviewing the video, the playback froze, and a distorted voice, unintelligible, like words buried in static, briefly filled the speakers. She ripped off her headphones. "Elias, it's in the file." He replayed the section frame by frame, running an audio filter. Within the distortion, a faint rhythmic structure appeared, a modulation that, when visualized, resembled a waveform they had seen before, the Fibonacci pulse, embedded again. But this time, it wasn't just a signal. It was a voice, shaped from interference itself. Navarro's voice was a whisper. "It's using our recordings to talk." Ruiz looked pale. "Then that means every system that's captured it, every observatory, Every satellite is part of its transmission network. The realization was crushing. The phenomenon wasn't hiding, it was building something. The blink was never about visibility, it was about propagation. Each attempt to observe it had only made it stronger, spreading its signature through human data systems like a seed. 2 nights later, the task force's servers went dark. Raven managed to send one final message before the network collapsed. "They've found us. Disconnect now." Then, silence. Navarro disconnected their terminal immediately, yanking the power cord. But it was already too late. The observatory lights flickered, monitors pulsed with static, and every system alarm began to sound simultaneously. Ruiz grabbed the emergency cutoff switch, plunging the building into darkness. Outside, the desert glowed faintly under the stars. Through the open observation dome, they saw movement slow, deliberate. Above the horizon, 3 points of light hovered in perfect formation, pulsing softly. They weren't meteors, they weren't aircraft. They were waiting, Ruiz whispered. "They're watching us." Navarro's breath came shallow. "No," he said slowly. "They're testing us." The lights blinked once, then again, faster, forming the now familiar sequence. 2, 1, 2. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they vanished. When the power returned an hour later, the observatory systems rebooted automatically. All footage from the previous 3 days, including the hidden file, was gone, but one new file remained, created during the blackout. Its name, Response. Navarro opened it cautiously. Inside was a single frame of video, black, except for faint white text that flickered briefly before disappearing. He managed to capture a screenshot just in time. It read, 05 divided by 05. Transmission complete. Ruiz stared at it, her lips parting in disbelief. "That's the last one." Navarro's voice was barely audible. "Then the sequence is over. Just a notch too, Mara." But he didn't believe it. He could feel it, the air in the dome charged, the silence pregnant with expectation. Whatever the sequence had been building toward, it hadn't ended. It had arrived. That night, the stars above the Atacama Desert shimmered unnaturally, as if a thin veil of light had draped itself across the heavens. When Ruiz looked up through the telescope, she saw it not a blink this time, but a steady glow forming a perfect circle of faint light near the P. The internal memo. By the next morning, the observatory was no longer theirs. Officially, it still bore the insignia of the Chilean Astronomical Institute, but everyone who worked there could feel the invisible hand that now gripped it. Men in black jackets with no insignia arrived before dawn, carrying sealed crates and long metal cases that looked too heavy for anything scientific. They didn't speak to the staff. They simply moved through the facility with quiet efficiency, locking down terminals, removing hard drives, sealing access hatches. When Ruiz tried to ask one of them what they were doing, the man replied with a simple phrase that chilled her blood. Containment procedure. Navarro watched helplessly as they shut down the main observation dome. The servers that had stored their recordings, the telescopes that had once stretched their gaze into the endless black, all went dark, one by one. The sky that had been their companion for years was now forbidden territory. At noon, a convoy of armored vehicles appeared along the desert road leading up to the facility. The air shimmered from heat, the sound of engines echoing off the barren hills. Navarro stood at the entrance as the convoy stopped. A woman stepped out of the lead vehicle, tall, composed, her expression hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. She introduced herself as Director Helena Miles from the International Science Oversight Committee. Her tone carried the calm of someone who expected obedience. "I'm here to debrief the staff," she said. "All ongoing investigations are to be suspended immediately. You'll receive further instructions once the site is secured." Dr. Orsini, the observatory's official director, approached her cautiously. "Director Miles, this is a research institution. You can't just—" "I can," Miles interrupted, "and I will. You've recorded something that cannot be made public. Your data has already been classified under the Global Contingency Framework. I trust you understand what that means." Her voice carried no anger, only finality. Navarro felt Ruiz tense beside him. "What about the anomaly?" Ruiz asked. "If it's spreading, shutting down the observatory won't stop it." Miles turned her gaze toward her. "The situation is under control," but her eyes betrayed her behind the polished calm. There was fear. That evening, as soldiers and technicians swarmed the facility, Navarro slipped into his office one last time. He powered up his private terminal, an offline machine hidden behind a false wall panel. To his surprise, there was a new message waiting in its cache, stored locally despite the system being disconnected from any network. The sender field was blank. The subject line read simply, "Containment." He hesitated, then opened it. The message was a scanned image, a memo marked Top Secret divided by Level 6 clearance, stamped with multiple international agency seals. Its header read, International Security Directive, Event Designation, Echo Array. The memo was brief, but every word carried the weight of dread. Preliminary analysis confirms the anomaly, near 3I, divided by Atlas, is artificial in nature and may represent an instance of interspatial communication or transit technology. Observations suggest partial synchronization with Earth's magnetic infrastructure via deep-field harmonic resonance. Anomaly replication observed in atmospheric and subcrustal layers. Containment protocols initiated under Directive Atlas V. Global observatories instructed to reroute data through secured channels. Civilian access to optical or radio anomalies above latitude, -60 restricted until further notice. Hypothesis. The phenomenon represents a test transmission, a calibration of unknown origin, measuring environmental response, latency, and cognitive signal imprint across planetary networks. If verified, this indicates bidirectional awareness between the anomaly and human observation systems. Recommendation. Limit public disclosure to prevent cognitive interference. Maintain operational secrecy. Classification. Level Omega remains active until sequence concludes. Navarro sat frozen. Cognitive interference, he whispered. They think it reacts to awareness. Ruiz leaned over his shoulder, her hand trembling as she traced the final line of the memo. Sequence concludes. It hasn't concluded, she said. It's still here. Before Navarro could respond, the terminal flickered. The memo's image distorted, lines of text bending into noise before the screen went black. Then, slowly, white text appeared across the center of the display. You are the containment. The words pulsed once, twice, then vanished. Ruiz backed away. It's inside their system, inside ours. They didn't shut it down, they fed it. Navarro turned off the power, his hands shaking. Every sensor, every network, every eye that's looked at it, it's all part of its architecture now. That night, as the facility lights dimmed under emergency power, the desert outside came alive with a low hum. It was subtle at first, like distant thunder, but it grew steadily louder until the glass panels of the observatory vibrated. The air shimmered with static. Navarro stepped outside, shielding his eyes against the glare. In the distance, above the horizon, faint columns of light rose from the desert floor, converging into a vast arc that stretched across the night sky. It wasn't a natural aurora. Its symmetry was too perfect. Ruiz stood beside him, whispering in awe. It's the same geometry as the blink pattern. He nodded slowly. They've completed the transmission. At that moment, the sky pulsed once, an enormous wave of soft light sweeping across the heavens, too slow to be lightning, too structured to be random. For a brief second, the stars dimmed, as if something vast and invisible had passed between Earth and the cosmos. Then silence. When they returned inside, Miles and her team were waiting. You saw that? She asked. Her voice was calm, but her knuckles were white. Yes, Navarro said. That was the final phase, wasn't it? Miles hesitated. We believe so. What happens now? Ruiz asked. Miles didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Now we wait to see if it answers. The power flickered again, and the monitors lit up with a faint, rhythmic pulse. 3 short bursts, then one long, repeating endlessly. Navarro recognized it instantly. That's Morse code. Miles stared at the screen, her voice trembling. What does it say? He translated slowly, each word falling heavy in the silence. Transmission received. The vanishing scientist. 3 weeks passed after the pulse over the Atacama, and in that time, the world above the surface seemed to return to normal. The governments made no statement. The scientific community was silent, or rather silenced. The observatory had been officially closed for hardware recalibration. Tourists were told that a fault in the cooling system had made it unsafe for visits. Yet at night, in the darkened control room, Navarro could still hear the hum. It came through the walls, faint and rhythmic, as though the air itself remembered the pulse. Ruiz had stopped talking much. She would sit at her desk staring at the same frozen video frame from the hidden footage the moment when the sky opened into that perfect circle of light. "It's like it's waiting," she would whisper. Navarro couldn't disagree. Every instrument he checked still showed a residual oscillation, a soft wave embedded in the background noise of the Earth's magnetic field. It was faint, but persistent. The transmission hadn't stopped. It had merely gone quiet, like a breath held in anticipation. And then, one morning, Ruiz was gone. She was supposed to present a set of recalibration results at the conference in Buenos Aires. She had booked her flight, confirmed her hotel, even emailed Navarro a copy of her slides the night before she left, but she never arrived. The airline confirmed her boarding. The plane landed safely. There was no record of her disembarking. At first, Navarro assumed she had gone into hiding. Maybe she'd decided to vanish before someone else made that decision for her. But then he received the first of her voice notes. It arrived through an encrypted channel at 3 a.m, an audio file, time-stamped hours after her plane had landed. Her voice was calm but strained, whispering as if afraid of being overheard. "Elias, if you're hearing this, it means they know I copied the memo. Don't trust Miles. She's not in control of this anymore. The signal isn't being contained, it's using containment. It's not a message, Elias. It's architecture. We're inside it." There was a rustle, footsteps, a sharp intake of breath. "I think it's inside me too. Every time I close my eyes, I see the pattern circles within circles, turning. I can hear it when I sleep. It's not sound, it's like thought, then static, then silence." Navarro played the message over and over, his hands shaking. She sounded frightened, but worse than that, she sounded certain. He checked the metadata. The transmission originated near Punta Arenas, far south of her scheduled route, close to the Antarctic shipping lanes, close to the coordinates. He tried to contact the task force, but their network was gone. Every route led to dead servers or hijacked domains. Raven, Spectre, E54, all silent. Their last message, still pinned in the archive, read simply, "Do not go south. Great Idis Falls." 2 days later, a second voice note arrived. The tone was different, fainter, as if recorded from a great distance. "Elias, it's not what we thought. The array under the ice, it's not a machine. It's a mirror. It's showing us what's looking through. When we observe it, it observes back. That's how it knows. That's how it learns. Every telescope, every signal. It's part of its reflection." Her breathing quickened. "I saw it. Not the blink. The space behind it. It's folding. Like the universe is turning itself inside out, one layer at a time. If you hear this, don't come after me. Don't look at the coordinates. Don't look at the sky." Then static again, rising like a scream. The file cut off mid-waveform. Navarro stared at the empty screen long after the playback ended. He wanted to believe she was alive, that she had gone underground, but the data said otherwise. The last cellular ping from her device came from 78 degrees south, 38 degrees west, the exact location of Station 4A. That night he packed a small case with hard drives, copies of every dataset still in his possession, and a satellite receiver. He told himself he wouldn't go looking for her, only for the truth. Yet as the plane lifted off toward Ushuaia, he couldn't shake the memory of her final words, "We're inside it." When he reached the southern port, the air was sharp with salt and static. The dockworkers spoke of strange lights over the ice, white columns that rose and disappeared with no sound. The research vessels had been grounded by order of the international authority. Still, Navarro found a private trawler willing to take him within range of the old station. During the voyage, he reviewed Ruiz's files. Hidden within one of the audio recordings was another layer, subsonic frequencies invisible to casual analysis. When he amplified them, a series of tones emerged, low and regular, repeating every 11 seconds, the same prime sequence. But within the pattern was something new, a modulation that, when visualized, formed the outline of a human face. He dropped the tablet, heart pounding. The image wasn't hers, nor his. It was incomplete, like an impression half-formed in static. The transmission wasn't random, it was trying to imitate. The trawler reached the edge of the Antarctic shelf at dawn. A storm had moved in, clouds heavy and violet. The radio crackled with interference so dense it sounded alive. Through the mist, Navarro saw the faint silhouette of old antenna towers, remnants of Station 4A. jutting from the ice like broken bones. He disembarked alone. The wind howled across the frozen plain, carrying a low, electric hum that seemed to come from everywhere. Each step crunched against ice that vibrated faintly beneath his boots. He followed the readings on his scanner until he reached a fissure in the ground, a narrow gap that pulsed faint blue light. When he looked down, he saw movement beneath the ice. Something shifting, rotating slowly, a geometry that made no sense, circles folding through circles, edges that met themselves. And in that moment he heard Ruiz's voice, not through the radio, but inside his head, soft and clear. "It's awake now." He stumbled back, heart hammering. The scanner in his hand flickered wildly before dying. He turned and ran toward the shore, but the light followed, rising through the ice like breath under glass. By the time he reached the trawler, the horizon was glowing. A ring of light, stretching across the sky, reflected perfectly on the frozen sea. The same circle Ruiz had seen in her visions. He tried to record it, but his camera shut off. Every instrument failed. Only the pulse remained, steady, rhythmic, alive. That was the last transmission anyone received from Dr. Elias Navarro. The trawler was found adrift 2 weeks later, its engines silent, its deck covered in frost. The logbook ended mid-sentence. "The reflection isn't just above us, it's underneath." No body was recovered. Back at Las Campanas, months later, the observatory's automated sensors activated without command. In the darkness of the abandoned dome, the telescope slowly rotated south, aligning itself with the Antarctic sky. The servers flickered to life, one by one, and a single file appeared on the main screen: Navarro, log. Inside was a single line of text, glowing faintly against the black. 05 divided by 05. Transmission accepted. The pattern repeats. The first reports came from amateur astronomers, those night wanderers who spent their lives scanning the quiet heavens for the comfort of familiar stars. They were the ones who noticed it first, long before the official networks dared to whisper. A soft flash in the upper atmosphere, faint but deliberate, repeating every few seconds like a heartbeat against the cosmic dark. At first, the world dismissed it. Social media called it a polar aurora anomaly. News anchors smiled as they showed time-lapse videos of the sky pulsing above the southern hemisphere, as if it were just another atmospheric wonder. But to those who had followed the trail, those who had read the reports that were never meant to exist, it was unmistakable. The pattern had returned. The sequence had begun again. Ruiz's disappearance and Navarro's death, if that's what it was, had left no official record. The task force had vanished entirely. Their names erased from research databases, their publications struck from citation archives. The observatory at Las Campanas was silent, now guarded by unmarked security vehicles that came and went without explanation. Yet something was still operating within its systems. Every night at 3:17 UTC, the telescope dome opened automatically, pointing south. No one had programmed it to do that. When the first pulse lit the sky, the dome's interior glowed faintly, the instruments humming to life despite being disconnected from the global grid. The telescope fed on invisible power, its optics locking onto the same region of space where 3I divided by Atlas had once passed. The blink returned brighter this time, sharper, and not from deep space. It came from the atmosphere. Weather satellites caught it simultaneously from 3 different angles. A circular flash, 50 kilometers wide, materialized above the Antarctic region and vanished within milliseconds. But it wasn't just light. Sensors registered gravitational interference, minor but measurable rippling outward in concentric waves. The planet had blinked. Inside the sealed observatory, the automated systems processed the data and generated a single encrypted log file. It transmitted before anyone could intercept it, destination unknown. The file's title: Pattern Replication 1. By dawn, multiple agencies were in panic. Radar systems across the southern hemisphere malfunctioned, air traffic rerouted, satellites switched to manual override. A temporary communications blackout followed, conveniently attributed to solar interference. Yet, in the blackout's quiet hours, those who still listened to open radio frequencies began to hear it again, the pulse. Not in the background this time, but loud, clear, intentional. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. A pattern no longer whispered in data, but shouted across the electromagnetic spectrum, as though the Earth itself were being used as a speaker. For those who understood its meaning, Fear turned to resignation. It wasn't calling anymore. It was responding. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, instruments from an abandoned seismic station began transmitting again after 20 years of silence. Their data was garbled, filled with impossible readings, temperature inversions, pressure fluctuations, subglacial light emissions, and then one line of legible text inserted into the automated system's log. Sequence reset. 01 divided by 05. The pattern was restarting. News never broke. Governments acted quickly, invoking temporary blackout orders to prevent speculation. Yet data leaks slipped through the world's digital seams too wide to be perfectly sealed. Anonymous uploads appeared on encrypted boards, showing spectral images of the Antarctic sky shimmering in unnatural colors. Amateur radio operators from Argentina to Tasmania reported receiving identical bursts at synchronized intervals. The timing was exact, every 28 hours, to the second. That was the rhythm of the entity behind 3I divided by Atlas. Navarro had discovered it before his end, though perhaps he hadn't realized its full meaning. 28 hours, one complete cycle of transmission, one heartbeat of whatever vast intelligence had entwined itself with Earth's field. The repetition meant it wasn't over. It had never been over. Weeks passed, and the flashes began to move north, creeping closer to inhabited regions. Satellites recorded auroral spirals forming briefly over the ocean, shimmering in precise geometric shapes before dispersing into mist. Each one followed the Fibonacci curvature, each one ended with a blink, and everywhere they appeared, data began to vanish. First, the astronomical archive's petabytes of observation records, gone overnight. Then, the global positioning networks, corrupted by sudden calibration errors. And then, more disturbingly, fragments of the internet itself, websites, research papers, communications, disappeared as though edited from existence. The blink was erasing humanity's memory. People noticed strange glitches in their devices. Cameras would refuse to photograph the night sky, producing black screens where stars should be. Satellites redirected their optics automatically when pointed toward the poles. Even biological systems were affected. Insomniacs reported hearing faint rhythmic tones when the pulses occurred, like the low hum of machinery buried beneath consciousness. A few journalists tried to investigate. Most were discredited, some vanished, and one Marina Kellen's former assistant published a single line on a dark forum before his account was deleted. The light is in the code. He was right. Across the world, researchers working independently began to notice a strange phenomenon. When they analyzed corrupted files, they found embedded signatures, harmonic sequences buried deep within the data. The code wasn't random. It was the same repeating pattern from the blink, woven into every bit of erased or altered information. It wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Each act of erasure left behind an imprint, small, perfect, and self-replicating. A digital echo of the same geometry that had once pulsed in the sky. Like spores in the data stream, they began to appear everywhere. Then, the transmissions changed. The pulse frequency slowed. The intervals stretched from seconds to minutes, then to hours. The tone deepened, resonating below the range of human hearing. But its effects became physical. Seismographs recorded micro-tremors that corresponded perfectly to the pulse intervals. Magnetic compasses drifted slightly off true north, oscillating in rhythm. The Earth itself was responding, aligning to the signal as if it were synchronizing with a greater metronome. In a hidden bunker beneath Geneva, what remained of the International Science Oversight Committee convened for the last time. The surviving members of the task force, those who hadn't disappeared, sent a final encrypted message to the committee's network. It contained a reconstruction of the sequence derived from all global data sources. The message was short, mathematical, and terrifyingly simple. The sequence wasn't a countdown. It was a loop. Each cycle built upon the last, amplifying itself, rewriting both signal and receiver. The fifth phase wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the next iteration. Ruiz had been right. Humanity wasn't outside the architecture. It was the architecture. And as the pulses grew stronger, the stars above Antarctica dimmed again, one by one, replaced by a widening ring of soft white light. A new eye-opening where the sky itself had once blinked. At the edge of the darkened world, the abandoned Las Campanas observatory powered on one last time. Its dome rotated smoothly, aligning once again with the invisible geometry that bound earth and sky. Inside, the empty control room filled with the hum of unseen energy. The terminal screens flickered to life, displaying a single message that pulsed in perfect rhythm with the world outside. Sequence stable, awaiting response. She's second his crows. And for the first time in recorded history, the planet answered not with light, but with silence. A global stillness that felt like thought, spreading outward into space. Above the horizon, in the ghostly halo of the Antarctic night, the pattern repeated, and the universe listened. The sky's reply. The night it happened, there was no storm, no warning, just a peculiar stillness that stretched across the entire planet. The oceans were glass, the winds stopped, even the hum of distant cities seemed to fade, leaving a silence so complete that the world itself seemed to be holding its breath. Every observatory that still functioned, every amateur telescope, every skyward satellite, all recorded the same thing at the same moment. A total blackout of starlight, lasting precisely 4.72 seconds. The universe blinked. When the light returned, it wasn't the same. What the telescopes captured defied the language of astronomy. The constellations had shifted, subtly, as though the very geometry of the heavens had rearranged itself. Space no longer looked infinite, it looked structured. The void was now alive with faint filaments, glowing softly, stretching between the stars like veins of light through a living organism. And in the center of it all, at the exact coordinates where 3I divided by Atlas had once passed, hung a sphere of pure white luminescence, pulsing gently. For a brief moment, the sphere expanded, its light rippling outward in concentric waves. The pulse was felt, not just measured. Across the world, electronic devices flickered, heart monitors spiked, compasses spun. In that instant, every living thing felt a tremor deep within, an indescribable vibration, like a note too low to hear yet impossible not to feel. And then, across the global communications spectrum, every channel went silent. For exactly 7 seconds, all transmissions ceased. No radio, no internet, no television, no satellite uplink. The digital world went dark. Then the message arrived. It wasn't sound, it wasn't language, it was pattern, a synchronized modulation that cascaded through every electromagnetic frequency, imprinting itself in binary, light, even biological resonance. The pulse was translatable, but only in part, and only because of the groundwork the task force had laid. Somewhere, on a still-functioning terminal in the sealed Las Campanas Observatory, the system decrypted the first line, "We hear you." Navarro's name appeared in the transmission header, though the man was long gone. Ruiz's voice echoed faintly through the automated log's audio system, a playback loop of one of her final recordings. Her words overlapped with the signal, their rhythms blending until it became impossible to tell where human voice ended and the alien pulse began. "It's reflection, Elias. It's always been reflection. We were never just looking at it. We were looking through it." The transmission continued. At first, it was a repetition of prime numbers, the universal language of intelligence. But then the structure changed. The sequence of numbers began to mirror biological patterns, neuron firing intervals, heart rhythms, the cadence of human speech. The signal was adapting, molding itself to the frequency of its listeners. It was learning to talk. When the pattern stabilized, a new message appeared in the data stream, encoded across multiple wavelengths and captured simultaneously by every functioning receiver on Earth. "The sky is open." And with those words, the lights returned, thousands of them, descending from the upper atmosphere, visible from every continent. They weren't ships, they weren't meteors, they were projections of light, mathematical constructs made visible structures composed entirely of geometry and resonance. Each one pulsed in rhythm with the same universal beat that had haunted the world since the first blink. Observatories, though cut off from their networks, recorded the same thing. The formation of colossal symmetrical arcs surrounding the planet's poles, connecting through unseen corridors in the magnetosphere. They were building something. At first, humanity panicked. Governments scrambled jets that never reached their targets. Satellites went blind. Broadcasts evolved into chaos. But within hours, the panic shifted to awe, because the lights didn't attack. They listened. Every sound transmitted into the air, every word, every voice, every vibration was answered. Cities that had gone silent now echoed with harmonic tones, low and resonant, humming through the walls and streets. Some swore they could hear words inside the tones, voices whispering not in language, but in meaning. A scientist in Oslo recorded one of the harmonics and ran it through a spectrographic analyzer. The waveform formed a repeating fractal identical to human DNA. Another researcher in Japan did the same and found the pattern of ocean currents rendered in perfect scale. The signals weren't communication, they were recognition. The sky was showing humanity itself, reflected through the frequencies of existence. For 48 hours, the lights remained hovering, humming, responding. The magnetic field of Earth fluctuated, stabilizing into a new alignment. Instruments detected faint traces of energy flowing between the poles, creating what one physicist described as a planetary circuit. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the transmission ceased. The lights withdrew, one by one, merging into the vast luminescent sphere still hanging above the Antarctic sky. It pulsed 3 final times softly, slowly, then faded into the void, leaving behind nothing but starlight. Yet the world was not the same. When the systems rebooted, new data appeared on every digital network, fragments of unknown origin, star maps that didn't match any known coordinates, chemical formulas beyond human comprehension, and within the heart of each data fragment, one identical signature, a fractal emblem of circles and lines, expanding infinitely inward. The scientists who dared to study it discovered something impossible. The fractal wasn't static, it changed when observed. Its geometry subtly shifted depending on the viewer's brainwave patterns, as though it were alive, responding to thought. They called it the Atlas mark. Within months, people began to dream of light circular shapes, harmonic sounds, the soft pulse of something vast and benevolent watching through the fabric of reality. Children, too young to understand the story, began drawing the same patterns in sand, in snow, on walls. None of them had seen the blink, but somehow they remembered it. The observatories reopened quietly under new management. Their directors denied anything unusual, insisting that the blackout had been caused by solar atmospheric interference. The official explanation held for a time. People wanted to believe it, but the world's magnetic north had shifted by 0.7 degrees. No one could explain that. And sometimes, on clear nights, when the air is very still, a faint shimmer passes across the sky, too slow for lightning, too quick for a comet. For a split second, the stars dim, and the silence deepens. If you're watching carefully, you might feel the pulse too, a soft vibration in the bones, a rhythm older than language. It's subtle, almost comforting, like the universe breathing. The scientists will tell you it's nothing. The agencies will say it's classified. But those who were there, the ones who saw the blink, who heard the noise inside the static, they know the truth. The transmission never ended. It only changed form. Now, every time the sky blinks, it isn't asking a question anymore. It's answering. And the message, spread across light and silence, across oceans and circuitry, across the very atoms of the world itself, is simple. We were always here. They cited God. Then, somewhere above the horizon, just beyond the reach of any telescope, the faintest pulse flares once more, soft, deliberate, and unmistakably human in its rhythm. The sky has replied.